On the coldest night of December, in the grandest ballroom in London, the Duke of Ashworth took the famous Ashworth diamonds, diamonds that had belonged to his wife, and to his mother, and to 5 duchesses before her, and he fastened them around the neck of his mistress. 200 guests watched him do it. 200 guests then turned slowly to look at his wife. They expected tears. They expected her to faint or to flee or to scream. Instead, the Duchess of Ashworth did something no one in that ballroom would ever forget. She curtsied and she smiled. Society called her broken. Society called her pathetic. Society said she smiled because she had nothing left. Society was wrong. Because the Duchess knew something that night, something about those diamonds, that would have stopped every heart in that ballroom. And by the time winter ended, one of the 3 people in this story would be utterly, completely ruined. It was not the one anybody expected. The winter ball at Ashworth House was the grandest event of the season. 1,000 candles burned in the great ballroom. Footmen in silver livery carried champagne on golden trays. Outside, snow fell softly on the streets of London. Inside, 200 of the finest people in England laughed and danced and watched each other with hungry eyes. And near the tall windows, in a gown of deep blue silk, stood Charlotte, the Duchess of Ashworth. She stood alone. She was used to standing alone. She had been the Duchess of Ashworth for 10 years, and for 10 years she had stood at the edge of rooms like this one, watching her husband charm everyone but her. "Your Grace," an elderly countess paused beside her, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How brave of you to come tonight." Charlotte turned. "Brave, Lady Morton, it is my own house." "Of course it is, dear." The old woman's eyes glittered. "Of course it is, for now." She drifted away, and Charlotte heard her whispering to another lady behind a fan. She did not need to hear the words. She knew what all of London was whispering. "Lady Vivienne Carroll, the Duke's new favorite, he parades her everywhere. He has lost all shame." Across the ballroom, as if summoned by the whispers, stood Lady Vivienne herself. She was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, polished, cold, and made to cut. Her gown was crimson. Her laugh was loud, and her hand rested on the arm of Charlotte's husband. Edmund, the 9th Duke of Ashworth, was still a handsome man at 45. Silver at his temples, a smile that could melt stone. He had used that smile on Charlotte's grandfather 12 years ago, when the old merchant was looking for a title to buy for his plain, quiet granddaughter. "A duke needs money," Edmund had said then, "and money needs a duke. We shall suit each other perfectly, Miss Winslow." Charlotte's fortune had rebuilt this very ballroom. Her money had repaired the roof, paid the servants, filled the stables. And in return she had received a coronet, a cold bed, and 10 years of small, careful cruelties. She watched her husband now, whispering something into Vivienne's ear, and she felt nothing. That was the strangest part. There had been a time when the sight of him would have crushed her heart like paper. That time was gone. Now she was simply waiting. At 11 o'clock the music stopped. The Duke stepped into the center of the ballroom and raised his hand. The crowd fell silent. Charlotte felt a cold finger of warning slide down her spine. Edmund loved an audience, and he had that look on his face, the look of a man about to perform. "My friends," he called out, his voice warm and rich, "tonight I wish to honor beauty, true beauty." A footman appeared at his side, carrying a flat velvet box. A murmur ran through the crowd like wind through wheat. Charlotte's hands went still at her sides. She knew that box. "For 200 years," the Duke continued, "the Ashworth diamonds have graced the necks of the finest women in England." He opened the box. The necklace blazed under the candlelight, a river of white fire. Gasps rose from every corner of the room. "My mother wore them, her mother-in-law before her. They are not merely jewels, they are a crown, and a crown." He paused, he smiled, and he turned not to his wife but to Lady Vivienne Caro. A crown belongs on the woman who deserves to wear it. The silence that followed was total. Somewhere, a glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered on the marble floor. No one even turned to look. Lady Vivienne stepped forward, her crimson gown whispering against the floor. She swept her dark hair aside and offered her white neck to the Duke. And there, before 200 guests, before God and all of London, Edmund fastened his wife's diamonds around the neck of his mistress. "Edmund," Vivienne breathed loud enough for all to hear, "they are magnificent." "They are exactly where they belong," said the Duke. And then Charlotte felt it like heat from a fire. Every eye in the ballroom turned to her. Lady Morton's fan had stopped moving. Young Lord Danvers stood frozen with his champagne halfway to his lips. 200 faces watched the Duchess of Ashworth, waiting for her to shatter like that fallen glass. Charlotte took a breath. She thought of her grandfather who had started with one market stall and died owning 20 ships. "When they cheat you, girl," he used to say, *smile. Smile and count. A merchant who loses his temper loses his fortune. A merchant who counts, collects. Charlotte stepped forward. The crowd parted before her. She walked, calm and straight, until she stood before her husband and his mistress. Vivienne's chin lifted in triumph. The diamonds glittered on her neck like ice. The Duchess of Ashworth sank into a deep, perfect, graceful curtsy. "What a memorable evening," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Lady Vivienne, the necklace suits you. Truly, I could not have chosen better myself." And she smiled. It was not a broken smile. It was not a trembling smile. Later, no one could quite describe it. Lady Morton would say it was the smile of a woman saying goodbye. Lord Danvers would swear it was the smile of a card player laying down her hand. Only one person in the ballroom felt a flicker of unease, deep beneath his triumph, and that was the Duke himself. For one heartbeat, looking into his wife's calm gray eyes, Edmund felt like a man standing on ice, hearing the first faint crack. Then the moment passed. Vivienne laughed. The music started again. The Duchess turned, nodded politely to her frozen guests, and walked out of the blazing ballroom alone, her head high, while behind her 200 voices exploded into whispers. The carriage was dark and cold. Betsy, her maid, sat opposite her, and the poor girl's eyes were red and swollen. "Oh, Your Grace," Betsy whispered, wiping her cheek. "The whole house is talking of it already, the shame of it. Before all those people, the diamonds, your diamonds." She broke into fresh tears. It's wicked what he's done to you." Charlotte gazed out the window. Snow was falling on London, soft and white and endless. In the glass, she could see her own faint reflection, and she was still smiling. "Don't cry, Betsy," she said quietly. "But Your Grace, how can you bear it? How can you smile?" Charlotte turned from the window. In the darkness of the carriage, her gray eyes were perfectly calm. "Because, my dear Betsy," she said, "if you only knew what that woman is actually wearing around her neck tonight, you would smile too." Betsy stared at her, tears forgotten. "Your Grace, what do you mean?" The Duchess leaned back against the velvet seat as the carriage rolled on through the snow. "All in good time," she said softly. "All in good time. It is only December after all." She closed her eyes. And winter is very long. To understand what the Duchess knew that night, we must go back. Back before the ball, back before the whispers, back to the beginning. Charlotte Winslow was 19 years old when the Duke of Ashworth first came to her grandfather's house. She was not a beauty, and she knew it. She was quiet, plain, and clever, and in the world she was born into, only the first two were noticed. Her grandfather, old Josiah Winslow, had built a fortune from nothing. One market stall, then a shop, then a warehouse, then 20 ships crossing the sea with tea and silk and spice. But money, in England, could buy everything except the one thing Josiah wanted for his granddaughter: a place among the great families, doors that would never open for a merchant's child. And then one spring afternoon, a duke walked through their door. Edmund was 33 then, and glorious. He complimented Josiah's brandy. He complimented Charlotte's quiet good sense. He never once looked at the worn carpet or the merchant's rough hands with scorn, not openly. "I shall be honest with you, Mr. Winslow," he had said with that warm, easy smile. "Ashworth is a great name attached to an empty purse. My father left debts. I need a wife of fortune. But I promise you this, your granddaughter will be a duchess, and I will treat her with honor." Honor, Charlotte would learn over 10 long years, exactly what that word meant to Edmund. It meant a wedding at St. George's with 400 guests, where the groom's friends smirked behind their gloves at the merchant's granddaughter in her too fine gown. It meant a wedding night, and then a marriage of separate rooms, separate lives, separate hearts. It meant hearing him say to his friends when he thought she could not hear, "One does not discuss poetry with one's banker, gentlemen, nor with one's wife," and the laughter that followed. It meant 10 years of small cruelties, each one too small to protest. Her chair placed slightly apart at dinners, her opinions cut off mid-sentence, her birthday forgotten every year without fail. But Charlotte was Josiah Winslow's granddaughter, and while her husband ignored her, she did what her blood knew how to do. She counted. She saw the household accounts when the steward thought she wasn't looking. She saw what Edmund spent on horses, on cards, on tailors, on women. She saw her grandfather's fortune, her fortune bleeding away year after year. And when Josiah died, God rest him, she discovered the last gift the wise old man had left her. "Your grandfather was a careful man, your grace," said Mr. Pembroke, the family solicitor, a small gray man with kind eyes. "The marriage settlement he wrote is unusual. Half of your fortune was paid to the Duke upon marriage, but the other half remains in trust in your name alone. Your husband cannot touch it. He cannot even see it." "Does the Duke know how much it is?" Charlotte had asked. "The Duke," said Mr. Pembroke carefully, "has never once asked me a question about money that he did not want answered with a check. He knows the trust exists. He believes it to be modest." The old solicitor allowed himself a very small smile. "He has never inquired further. Arrogance, your grace, is a kind of blindness." Charlotte had folded her hands and said nothing, but she remembered. Smile and count. The diamonds came into the story 6 months before the winter ball, on an ordinary Tuesday in June. Charlotte rarely wore the Ashworth necklace. It lived in the strongbox in the library, and it came out twice a year for the grandest occasions, because tradition demanded that a duchess wear it. She did not love it. How could she love a thing that Edmund's mother had worn while calling her the little shopkeeper asterisk to her face? But she respected it. It was 200 years of history. It was worth a fortune. That June, a state dinner was announced, and Charlotte took the necklace out to have the clasp cleaned. She carried it herself to Garrard's, the royal jewelers, as she always did. Old Mr. Fenn, the head jeweler, put his glass to his eye. Charlotte watched his face. She watched it change. "Your Grace." His voice was very quiet. He set the necklace down as if it had burned him. "Your Grace, may I ask, when was this necklace last in your keeping?" "It is always in my keeping. It sits in the strongbox at Ashworth House. Why, what is wrong with the clasp?" Mr. Fenn was silent for a long moment. He was an old man who had served 3 generations of dukes, and Charlotte could see him choosing his words the way a man chooses his steps on thin ice. "There is nothing wrong with the clasp, your grace. The clasp is excellent work, very fine work indeed." He looked up at her. "It is the finest imitation I have seen in 40 years. The room went very still. "Imitation," Charlotte repeated. "Paste, your grace, glass and lead crystal foiled and set by a master hand. From 2 feet away it would deceive a bishop. He turned the necklace over gently. But it would not deceive a jeweler's glass. These are not the Ashworth diamonds. I set 2 of these stones myself 30 years ago when the old Duke had the necklace repaired. I know them as I know my own children. These are strangers. Charlotte stood very still in the quiet shop. Strange, her heart was not pounding. It had gone cold and slow and clear like a frozen river. "Mr. Fenn," she said calmly, "who in London could produce work of this quality?" 3 men, perhaps, no more. "I should like their names." The old jeweler hesitated. "Your Grace, should this not be a matter for the Duke or the police if there has been a theft?" "Mr. Fenn," Charlotte met his eyes, "you have served this family for 40 years. Tell me honestly, if a thief had broken into Ashworth House, opened a locked strongbox without a mark, taken the necklace, and replaced it with a copy so perfect it took your glass to detect it, a copy that must have taken months to make, from precise measurements of the original, what kind of thief would that be?" Mr. Fenn looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the necklace, and he suddenly seemed very old and very tired. "The kind, Your Grace," he said softly, "who did not need to break in at all." It took Charlotte 3 weeks and the quiet help of Mr. Pembroke to follow the trail. A discreet clerk, a guarded question, a name, a workshop in Clerkenwell that asked no questions. And then, at the end of the trail, a pawnbroker's establishment near the Strand, the kind with a respectable front and a very private back room, where gentlemen of quality brought the treasures of their houses when the cards had gone against them. Mr. Pembroke went in her place, as a solicitor making confidential inquiries for an unnamed client. Money changed hands, and on a gray afternoon in July, in the back office of that pawnshop, Mr. Pembroke was shown a ledger. That evening he came to Charlotte, and his kind old face was grim. "The Ashworth diamonds were pledged in this establishment 14 months ago, Your Grace, for £11,000. The interest has been paid quarterly, barely. The stones sit in the pawnbroker's vault to this day." He paused. "There is more. I saw the ledger with my own eyes. I saw the signature of the gentleman who pledged them." Charlotte sat motionless by the cold fireplace. Outside, a summer rain was beginning to fall. "Tell me the name, Mr. Pembroke." The old solicitor took a breath. "It was no thief, Your Grace. It was no stranger. The necklace was pledged by His Grace himself, Edmund, Duke of Ashworth, signed in his own hand." The rain ticked against the windows. Somewhere in the great empty house, a clock struck the hour. And Charlotte Winslow, the merchant's granddaughter, the little shopkeeper, the invisible Duchess, sat quietly in her chair and began at last to count. There are 2 kinds of war. There is the war of cannons and trumpets which everyone sees, and there is the other kind, the quiet kind, fought with ledgers and lawyers and patience, which no one sees at all until it is already lost. Charlotte chose the quiet kind. On a gray morning in August, a closed carriage stopped in a narrow street near the Strand. A lady stepped down, dressed in plain black with a heavy veil over her face. She might have been a widow. She might have been anyone. Inside the pawnbroker's private office, Mr. Isaacs, a careful man with careful eyes, studied the banker's draft on his desk. £11,000 plus interest, every penny accounted for. "The pledge is redeemed in full, madam," he said, "though I confess it is unusual. The gentleman who left the item generally sends word first." "The gentleman," said the veiled lady quietly, "does not know that his interest has been protected, and he will not know. That is the condition of this transaction, Mr. Isaacs. You have been paid handsomely for your discretion." Mr. Isaacs had been in business for 30 years precisely because he understood which questions not to ask. He bowed, went to his vault, and returned with a flat leather case. He opened it. Even in that dim little office, the Ashworth diamonds blazed. The real ones. 200 years of history, a river of white fire, sitting in a pawn shop like a sailor's watch. Charlotte looked at them for a long moment through her veil. Then she closed the case with a soft click. "Thank you, Mr. Isaacs, you never saw me." "Madam," said the pawnbroker, already writing in a different ledger, "I have never seen anyone in my life." That same afternoon, the diamonds were placed in a private vault at Coutts Bank, in a box registered to a name no one in society had ever heard. And the necklace that slept in the strongbox at Ashworth House, the glass one, the beautiful lie, stayed exactly where it was. Let him keep his lie, Charlotte thought. Let him guard it, let him believe. A lie, after all, is a debt, and all debts come due. It is worse than we feared, Your Grace. September now. Rain against the windows of Mr. Pembroke's office at Lincoln's Inn. The old solicitor laid paper after paper on the desk before her, and each one was a wound. The 11,000 from the diamonds went to a gambling debt at his club, a debt of honor, they call it. Mr. Pembroke's voice was dry as dust. But it was a bucket of water on a burning house. His Grace owes money everywhere, to the banks, to the moneylenders, to his wine merchant, his tailor, his coachmaker. He has borrowed against the London house. He has borrowed against next year's rents. He has even. The old man hesitated. He has even borrowed against the hope of your death, Your Grace. There is a policy. Forgive me. Charlotte sat very still. How much altogether? Near £70,000, perhaps more. He hides debts even from his own steward. Pembroke removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. Your Grace, the truth is simple. The Duke of Ashworth is a ruined man. He simply hasn't fallen down yet. He is like a great tree, rotted hollow, still standing only because no strong wind has come. And Lady Vivienne, Charlotte asked, does she know she has attached herself to a hollow tree? Lady Vivienne, I am told, believes the Duke to be one of the richest men in England. He spends like one on her especially. Dresses, a carriage, emeralds in October. Pembroke's mouth tightened with distaste. Ruined men often spend the loudest, Your Grace. Quiet purses can afford to be quiet. Charlotte rose and walked to the window. Below, the lamplighters were beginning their rounds, small flames blooming one by one in the wet dusk. She thought of her grandfather's ships. She thought of 10 years of dinners where her chair was placed slightly apart. She thought of a policy, written on the hope of her death. Mr. Pembroke, she said, the trust my grandfather left me, what does it stand at today? With the investments these past years, the railways have been kind to us. A little above £90,000, Your Grace. 90,000, more than everything her husband owed. Her grandfather, dead these 6 years, could still buy and sell the Duke of Ashworth. She almost smiled. Then here is what we shall do. She turned from the window and her voice was calm and clear, the voice of Josiah Winslow's granddaughter giving orders in a counting house. You will create a company, something dull and forgettable. Its papers will be in order, its money will be real, and its owner will be invisible, a trust behind a trust, a name behind a name. Can you build me such a thing? I can, Your Grace. It is done every day in the city. What is the company to do? It is to buy debts, Mr. Pembroke, one kind of debt only. She came back to the desk and rested her fingertips on the pile of papers on the wounds. It will go quietly to every man my husband owes. The banks first, they are discreet. Then the moneylenders, they are greedy, and greed is discreet too. It will offer them ready money for the Duke's paper. Some will sell at a discount. Ruined men's debts always go cheap. It will buy and buy and buy. Slowly, patiently. Over months, so no one sees a pattern. Mr. Pembroke had gone quite still. He was looking at her the way Mr. Fenn, the jeweler, had looked at the false diamonds, as a man discovering that the thing before him was not what the world believed it to be. And when it is done, Your Grace, when this, Company holds all your husband's debts in one hand. What then? Then, Mr. Pembroke, we shall wait for winter. Charlotte drew on her gloves, one finger at a time. My husband believes I am a piece of furniture he purchased 12 years ago. He believes my silence is weakness and my patience is stupidity. He will go on spending and preening and parading that woman through my house. Let him. Every pound he borrows, he will be borrowing from me. Every candle in every ballroom mine. The emeralds on Lady Vivienne mine. He will owe his coat, his carriage, his dinner, and his pride to a stranger he has never met. She picked up her veil. And on the day of my choosing, only then, the stranger will knock on his door. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain. Then old Mr. Pembroke, who had served the law for 40 years and thought he had seen everything in it, did something he had never done in his life. He stood up from his own desk and bowed to her deeply, slowly, from the waist, as men bow to royalty. The company will need a name, Your Grace, he said. Something dull, as you say, forgettable. Charlotte paused at the door, and for the first time that gray afternoon she truly smiled. My grandfather's first ship, the one he bought half-share when he was 22, the one that made everything after it possible. Do you remember what she was called, Mr. Pembroke? The old solicitor thought for a moment, and then slowly he smiled too. The Patience, Your Grace. She was called the Patience. Then we shall call it Patience and Company. Charlotte lowered the veil over her face. It amuses me, and no one else will ever understand the joke until it is far, far too late. That October, a dull little firm called Patience & Co. quietly purchased its first paper. A note of hand for £4,000, signed by His Grace the Duke of Ashworth, sold at a discount by a banker who was glad to be rid of it. The Duke never noticed. That same week, he bought Lady Vivienne a sable cloak for the coming winter on credit. He was borrowing, though he did not know it, from his wife. And in 2 months' time, at the great winter ball, he would stand before 200 guests and fasten a necklace of glass around his mistress's neck, while his wife, the richest person in the room, curtsied and smiled. After the winter ball, the Duke stopped pretending. Within a week, Lady Vivienne Caro's trunks arrived at Ashworth House. Officially, she was a guest for the season. Everyone knew what she truly was. Her boxes filled the great hallway. Her perfume filled the corridors. Her voice, that loud, bright, cutting laugh, filled rooms that had been silent for years. And on the second morning, at breakfast, the Duke made his wishes plain. Charlotte, the blue apartments face the garden and get the morning light. Lady Vivienne suffers from headaches. She will take those rooms. He did not even look up from his newspaper. You may have the East Rooms. The East Rooms. The small, cold rooms above the kitchens, where they had once lodged an elderly aunt no one wanted to see. Betsy wept as she packed. The footmen carried the Duchess's belongings up the narrow back staircase, and none of them could meet her eyes. In the corridor, Charlotte passed Lady Vivienne, who stood watching the procession with a small, satisfied smile, twirling something on her finger. The keys. The household keys. The keys that belonged, by 200 years of custom, to the Duchess of Ashworth. His Grace felt, said Vivienne sweetly, that the running of the house was a burden on you, my dear. You seem so tired lately. I shall manage everything now. You needn't trouble yourself about a thing. Charlotte looked at the keys, glittering on the white hand. Then she looked at Vivienne's throat, where the necklace of glass and lead, worn almost daily now, flaunted at every dinner, caught the winter light. How kind, said Charlotte. You seem born to carry other women's things. She walked on, up the servants' stairs, before Vivienne could work out whether she had been insulted. But that night, alone in the cold East Rooms, listening to laughter float up from her own dining room, from her own table, bought with her own money, Charlotte pressed her face into her pillow. Patience was a plan. Patience was a strategy. But even the strongest woman is still a woman, and some nights, even generals weep. She permitted herself 1 hour of tears, one only. Then she sat up, dried her eyes, lit a candle, and wrote a short letter to Mr. Pembroke. How much of the 70,000 do we now hold? See. The reply came 2 days later, hidden inside a folded pattern for embroidery, in the old solicitor's careful hand. As of this week, 41,000, Patience, madam, is proving a profitable ship. P. The colonel arrived on the 9th of January, with the worst snowstorm of the winter at his back. Charlotte was in the library, one of the last rooms in the house that still felt like hers, when she heard the commotion in the hall. A man's voice, deep and warm, and the old butler, Hodges, sounding happier than he had in years. "Colonel James, God bless my soul, we had no word, sir, no word at all." Colonel James Ashworth was the Duke's first cousin, the son of the old Duke's younger brother. He had gone to India with his regiment 15 years ago, a penniless young officer with nothing but a good name and a strong back. Charlotte had met him only once, briefly, at her wedding. She remembered a sunburnt young man who had bowed over her hand and said, "My cousin is luckier than he deserves, Your Grace," and had seemed, unlike everyone else that day, to actually mean it. Now he stood in the hall shaking snow from his coat, 40, broad-shouldered, his face weathered brown, a scar above one eyebrow. He had come home with a colonel's rank, a modest fortune honestly earned, and as London would soon learn, no patience whatsoever for nonsense. "Cousin," the Duke came down the stairs with his arms wide, all charm, already calculating. A cousin with India money was a cousin worth charming. "You should have written. We'd have killed the fatted calf." "I wrote 3 times, Edmund." James's voice was mild, but his eyes were not. "Perhaps the letters are under the bills on your desk." There was a small, awkward silence. Then the Duke laughed too loudly and swept his cousin in to dinner. That dinner told Colonel James everything. He saw a woman he did not know sitting at the foot of the table at the Duchess's place, wearing what looked, to his untrained eye, like the famous Ashworth diamonds, and laughing at all of Edmund's jokes before Edmund finished them. And he saw, halfway down the table's side between an empty chair and a deaf old vicar, the actual Duchess of Ashworth in a plain gray dress, being served last by embarrassed footmen. Nobody spoke to her. James watched this arrangement for 2 full courses, saying little. Then, when the fish was cleared, he rose, walked the length of the table, and before every guest, before the Duke, before Lady Vivienne's astonished eyes, moved the empty chair and sat down beside the Duchess. "Your Grace," he said quite clearly into the silence, 15 years ago at your wedding, you were kind to a young officer nobody knew. I have not forgotten. Would you do me the honor of telling me what on earth has happened to England while I've been away? I find I don't recognize it." He said it looking at her, but everyone at the table understood what he had truly said, and to whom. Charlotte looked into his steady, weathered face, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, someone in that house was seeing asterisk her, not the merchant's granddaughter, not the discarded wife, not the furniture, simply her. "It has changed a great deal, Colonel," she said. "The gentlemen wear their honor much shorter now. It is considered more fashionable." James laughed, a real laugh, sudden and loud, the first honest sound that dining room had heard in months. At the head of the table the Duke's smile went thin, and Lady Vivienne's fork paused, just for a heartbeat, over her plate. She had a talent for many things, Vivienne, but her greatest talent was smelling danger. Through January the Colonel stayed on at Ashworth House, to settle family business, he said, and a quiet pattern formed. He rode out early, so it emerged, did the Duchess. He liked the library in the afternoon, so it had always been, did she. They talked about India, about her grandfather's ships, about books, about nothing. He never once flattered her. He never once pitied her. Either would have driven her away. He simply kept moving the chair. If the Duke noticed, he did not care. A wife occupying a cousin was a wife not underfoot. Edmund had larger concerns that arrived daily in narrow envelopes from banks whose letters were growing strangely short and cold. But late one evening, the colonel knocked at the library door, and his face was grave. "Your Grace, forgive the hour. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me plainly." He kept his voice low. "This afternoon Edmund called me into his study, some tale about investing my India money in a scheme of his. While he talked, there were papers on his desk. He covered them when I came near, but he was slow, and I have spent 15 years reading maps quickly." He paused. Charlotte. It was the first time he had used her name. One of those papers was practice. A single line written over and over down the page, the way a schoolboy practices his letters. It was a signature, and unless I am very much mistaken, it was *yours. The fire cracked in the grate. Outside, the January wind pressed against the windows. "Mine," Charlotte said quietly. "Yours, your name, in what will soon be a very fair copy of your hand." James's jaw was tight. "I don't yet know what my cousin needs your signature for, but I know this, whatever it is, he has decided not to ask you for it." Charlotte sat very still, her mind moving fast and cold. The trust. £90,000 behind a legal wall, a wall with only one gate, and that gate was her signature. Edmund had finally asked the question he had never bothered to ask. And he hadn't liked the answer. The Duke made his move on the last day of January. He chose his moment carefully, after dinner, in the drawing room, with a fire burning and brandy in his hand and his voice at its warmest. Charlotte had learned over 12 years to fear that warmth the way sailors fear a red morning sky. "My dear," he drew a folded paper from his coat, "a small matter of business, tiresome stuff. Pembroke and the bankers have been at me about consolidating the estate accounts, modernizing they call it. It needs your signature as a formality, here and here. Then we need never speak of it again." He laid the paper before her and held out a pen, smiling. Charlotte took the document. She read it slowly from the top, the way her grandfather had taught her to read everything a smiling man puts in front of you. And there it was, dressed up in lawyer's language, buried in the third paragraph. Full authority to direct, invest, and disperse the funds of the trust settled upon her Grace. The gate to her grandfather's wall. He was asking her to open it herself. "How odd," Charlotte said pleasantly. "Mr. Pembroke made no mention of this to me." "Pembroke is old, he forgets." "Mr. Pembroke," said Charlotte, "remembers what he ate for breakfast on the day of the Queen's coronation." She set the paper down unsigned and looked up at her husband. "I shall write to him tomorrow and ask him to explain it to me, every line. You know how slow I am about business, Edmund. It comes of being a shopkeeper's granddaughter." The warmth drained out of the Duke's face like water out of a cracked bowl, and for one moment, just one, Charlotte saw what lived underneath it. Something cornered, something desperate, something that hated her. "You will sign the paper, madam." "I will read the paper, sir. My grandfather bought me that privilege. It cost him half his fortune." The Duke stared at her. Then he snatched up the document, hurled his brandy into the fire, the flames leapt, blue and hissing, and walked out. Vivienne was waiting in the corridor. Charlotte heard their voices through the door, low and furious, and though she could not make out the words, she did not need to. She had refused to open the gate. Now they would try to remove the gatekeeper. The sentence came down 2 days later, at breakfast, in front of the servants, because Edmund never wasted an audience. "Your health, Charlotte, has been a concern to me for some time." He said it while buttering toast. "Your nerves, your moods. London clearly does not agree with you. I have decided you shall retire to Fernhallow until you are recovered. The country air will do wonders. Fernhallow, the Dower House, a damp square box on the edge of the northern estate, 200 miles from London, where Ashworth men had been sending unwanted women for generations. And this was the last day of January, with snow on every road in England. "You are sending me away in the middle of winter," Charlotte said quietly. "I am sending you to rest, madam. There is a difference." "Is there? I shall write to the College of Physicians and inquire." She rose from the table. "How many trunks am I permitted, Edmund? Or shall you have Lady Vivienne count my dresses at the door?" Down the table, a young footman made a small sound, quickly smothered, that might have been a laugh. He was dismissed by nightfall, but he found, when he reached his mother's cottage, that a month's wages had somehow already arrived there ahead of him, in an envelope with no name. The Duchess of Ashworth left London 3 days later in falling snow. The servants lined up in the hall to see her off, every one of them, though no order had been given, and old Hodges the butler wept openly as he handed her into the carriage. From an upstairs window, Lady Vivienne watched, wearing a mourning gown and the glass diamonds, victorious. Society talked of nothing else for a week. Banished, discarded. The little merchant Duchess, sent to the Dower House like a broken chair. At the clubs, men laid wagers on how soon the Duke would be free to remarry. In the drawing rooms, ladies who had eaten Charlotte's dinners for a decade agreed, comfortably, that she had always been rather odd, poor thing, and perhaps it was for the best. Only one voice in one club spoke against the current. Colonel James Ashworth, when a grinning baronet repeated the joke about the broken chair, set down his glass, stood, and said with terrible mildness, "I have known men flogged for less honest work than that lady has done in that house. Say it again, sir, and you may choose your friends." The baronet did not say it again, but the story traveled, as stories do. And in her cold little parlor at Fernhallow, when it reached her in one of Betsy's letters from her sister in London, Charlotte read it 3 times and sat for a long while looking at the fire. Here is what the Duke never understood, what men like the Duke never understand. He thought he had buried her. He had, in fact, set her free. At Fernhallow there were no watching eyes, no Vivienne rustling down the corridors, no husband demanding signatures. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles off. The post came twice a week. And the Duke, satisfied that his wife was rotting quietly in the north, never once thought to ask what she did with her days. What she did was run a war. Mr. Pembroke came up from London the first week of February to review her Grace's household expenses, and stayed 3 days. The ledgers came out of his traveling case. Patience & Co., that dull little firm, had been busy. £53,000 of the Duke's paper now slept in its files. The moneylenders had sold eagerly, at 8 shillings on the pound. They knew rot when they smelled it. 2 of the 3 banks had quietly followed. "The last of it is stubborn," Pembroke reported. "A private loan of 9,000 from Lord Carew." He paused meaningfully. "Lady Vivienne's uncle." "So the lady's own family holds a knife to him too." Charlotte almost laughed. "Buy it. Offer Lord Carew his full sum. He'll sell his niece's protector for face value and think himself clever. And then, your Grace, it is done. Every pound. There will not be a candle lit in Ashworth House that you do not own." Charlotte walked to the window. The moors rolled away white and endless under the February sky, and she found, to her own surprise, that she had never in her life felt less like a woman in exile. "Not yet," she said. "Not until he swings the axe first. When he moves against me openly, Mr. Pembroke, and he has practiced my signature, he is past the point of shame, the world must see him strike an innocent woman. Then and only then does patience knock on his door. I will not merely win. I will be seen to have been wronged. That is the only victory society understands." Old Pembroke looked at her, the plain, quiet girl he had first met at a wedding 12 years ago, and thought that somewhere, old Josiah Winslow was on his feet, applauding. The colonel came north in the second week of February, through vile roads, staying properly and correctly at the coaching inn in the village, and calling at Fernhallow every single day. They walked the frozen gardens. They argued about books. He taught her a card game from the officers' mess. She beat him at it by the third evening, and he laughed until the windows rattled. Neither of them said anything that could not have been printed in the parish newsletter. Neither of them needed to. On his last day, he was summoned to Edinburgh, regimental business, a matter of weeks. He stood in the doorway turning his hat in his hands like a boy. "I don't like leaving. I'll say it plainly. I don't trust my cousin and I don't trust the quiet." He took out a card and wrote on the back, "This reaches me day or night. If anything feels wrong, Charlotte, you send one word and I will be on the next train north or south or to the devil's own doorstep. Promise me." "I promise, James." She watched his carriage until it was a black speck on the white road, and did not entirely understand why the house felt colder after. 4 days later, Betsy came running into the parlor with a letter from her sister, who was, by no accident at all, now employed as a housemaid at Ashworth House in London. Charlotte read it once, then again slowly. Then she stood up so quickly that her chair scraped the floor. "And Milady V has been at his grace all week about the great necklace, She says if she is to wear it she must have it insured against thieves, proper with Lloyd's like a lady of quality. His grace said no and no and no. He was in a fearful temper about it, but Milady stamped and wept and locked her door, and yesterday his grace gave in, all grey in the face he was. The insurance gentlemen come to the house Thursday week, They are bringing their own jeweler to value the stones." Betsy watched her mistress's face, bewildered. Is it bad news?" Charlotte lowered the letter. Her heart was beating hard and slow, and outside the February wind was rising over the moors, and when she spoke it was barely above a whisper. "They are going to put a jeweler's glass to it, Betsy." She looked up, and her eyes were shining. "Thursday week, in my husband's own drawing room, in front of witnesses from Lloyd's of London, someone is finally going to look at that necklace." Thursday came. The gentlemen from Lloyd's arrived at Ashworth House at 11 o'clock precisely. 2 insurance men in sober black, and between them a small, neat person with gold spectacles and a leather case. Mr. Aldous Wick, consulting jeweler, a man who had valued the treasures of half the great houses of England. Lady Vivienne received them in the great drawing-room. She had dressed for the occasion as if for a coronation, and the necklace lay before them on a bed of black velvet, blazing in the winter sunlight. The Duke stood by the window. He had said almost nothing all morning. A servant would later swear that his Grace's coffee had trembled in its cup at breakfast, and that he had twice started letters and twice burned them. "A celebrated piece," said Mr. Wick pleasantly, sitting down to the velvet. "The Ashworth necklace. I have wanted to see it my whole professional life. With your permission, my lady." He screwed the glass into his eye and bent over the stones. The clock on the mantel ticked. Vivienne examined her rings. The Lloyd's men murmured over their forms. And by the window, the 9th Duke of Ashworth stood with his back to the room, gripping the sill, watching the street below like a man watching the tide come in. The ticking went on, too long. Mr. Wick straightened. He took the glass from his eye, polished it slowly with his handkerchief, and put it back. He lifted the necklace, turned it against the light, and touched one stone gently with a small steel instrument. Then he laid the piece down on the velvet with extreme care, the way one lays down something dead. "My lady," his voice was quiet and very level, "might I ask when this piece was last examined by a professional man?" "What can that possibly matter?" Vivienne laughed high and bright. "Value it, sir. The Duke says it is worth £40,000 if it is worth a penny." Mr. Wick removed his spectacles. He looked at the Lloyd's men. He looked at the Duke's rigid back. And then, because he was an honest man at the end of a long, honest career, he said what he had to say. "Madam, I am very sorry. Lloyd's cannot insure this necklace for £40,000. He paused. "The stones are paste. Glass, madam, foiled glass and lead crystal. Superb work, the finest imitation I have ever handled, but imitation. As jewels, this piece is worth perhaps £30. As history," he closed his case, "it is worth nothing at all because it has none. It was made, I should judge, within the last 2 years. There are silences, and there are silences. This one lasted 5 full seconds, and every servant listening at the door would remember it for the rest of their lives. Then Lady Vivienne began to scream. She did not weep prettily, she howled asterisk. She snatched the necklace up and shook it at the jeweler. "Liar! You little liar, you've been paid to say it." She hurled it across the room, where it struck a mirror and slid down in a glittering, worthless heap. She rounded on the Duke, and her beautiful face was not beautiful at all now. "Glass," her voice cracked like a whip. "You fastened glass on me, before 200 people. Every woman in London has envied me that necklace, they have curtsied to it, and it is glass. I am a laughingstock. I am a where are the real stones, Edmund? Where are the diamonds?" And here the Duke of Ashworth made his fatal mistake. He hesitated. It was only a moment, only a heartbeat of gray-faced silence while behind his eyes, terror scrambled for a story. But Vivienne had spent her whole life reading men the way Charlotte read ledgers, and she saw it. She saw that he was not surprised enough. "You knew," she whispered. "Don't be absurd. You knew, that is why you fought the insurance, no and no and no, you knew." She was very still now, which was far worse than the howling. "What did you do with them, Edmund?" The Lloyd's men were shown out with unseemly haste. What was said in that drawing-room for the next hour, no servant heard entire, only fragments through the door. The crash of something breaking, Vivienne's voice rising and falling like a saw, and once, terribly, the Duke shouting in the voice of a cornered animal. "My wife, do you hear me? She has done this, she found them out, and she has taken them." He went to the pawnshop the very next morning, alone, on foot, in a plain coat, like a thief returning to the scene. Mr. Isaacs received him with perfect courtesy. "The Ashworth pledge," said the Duke low and fast. "I wish to discuss redeeming it, the terms." "Your Grace," Mr. Isaacs folded his hands, "that pledge was redeemed in full this past August, principal and interest. Surely your Grace received our notice of discharge." The shop went very quiet. The Duke stood absolutely still, and his face slowly lost its color, from the brow downward, like a house going dark window by window. "Redeemed," he said. "By whom?" "By a representative of the interested party, your Grace, a lady. She did not leave her name." A pause, delicate as a scalpel. "She was veiled." A lady, veiled. The Duke gripped the counter. There was no mystery to solve. There was only one woman on earth who could have known and traced it, and paid £11,000 without blinking, and said nothing for 6 entire months, while she curtsied to his mistress and smiled. "If you only knew what that woman is wearing around her neck tonight." He walked home through the gray streets without seeing them, and with every step, the true shape of his position closed around him like ice closing on a pond. He could not go to the police and cry theft. The ledger by the Strand held his own signature. The theft would lead straight back to his own fraud. He could not sue. The courts meant newspapers. He could not even quietly demand the stones back, because to demand them was to admit he had pawned them, and the woman he would be demanding them from asterisk had proof of it, had held that proof, patient as a spider, for half a year. She knew about the diamonds. What else did she know? What else had she asterisk done? He thought suddenly of the banks, of the strange, cold shortness of the banks all winter. And for one vertiginous moment, the Duke of Ashworth stood on the pavement of Piccadilly and felt the whole solid world tilt underneath him. She had to be silenced, not punished, silenced, disarmed, made into someone whose word was worth nothing, whose papers could be seized, whose signature could be exercised on her behalf by her legal guardian, her husband. He did not have the word for it yet. Vivienne gave it to him that night. She had not left. Where would she go, with her reputation nailed to his? And she came to his study at midnight, cold and clear-eyed, her rage refined now into something much more useful. "Stop drinking and listen to me," she said. "Your merchant wife has outplayed you, and if she can prove the pawning, she can ruin you in every drawing room and every courtroom in England. So she must never be in a position to prove anything. A madwoman's evidence, Edmund, is no evidence at all." The Duke looked up slowly from his glass. "My uncle's first wife," Vivienne went on, softly, terribly, grew difficult in just this way, suspicious, full of wild stories about her husband. 2 physicians examined her, sympathetic men who understood how these sad cases distress a family. She spent her last 19 years very quietly in a private establishment in Yorkshire, and my uncle managed all her affairs. She leaned down and put her lips close to his ear. "Think, Your Grace, delusions of persecution. She believes her husband stole her diamonds. She believes he forges her name. She believes, poor creature, that he plots against her very life. Why, the more truth she tells, the madder she will sound." Silence and the fire settling in the grate. "Doctors can be found," whispered Vivienne. "For a fee, doctors can always be found." And God forgive him, the 9th Duke of Ashworth set down his glass, drew a sheet of paper toward him, and picked up his pen. Far to the north, at Fernhallow, the snow had stopped and the moon was out, and Charlotte stood at her window unable to sleep, watching the white moors glitter, wondering why no word of Thursday's appraisal had yet reached her, and telling herself it was only the winter post. She had planned for his rage. She had planned for lawyers, for threats, for the forged signature, for the axe swung in daylight where society could see it. She had not planned for what was already traveling toward her, that very night, in a closed black carriage on the Great North Road. 2 gentlemen of medicine, riding through the dark with a letter of instruction in their bag, and a signed order naming one * Charlotte, Duchess of Ashworth. And, folded neatly beside it, a printed form from a private asylum in Yorkshire, with every line already filled in but one. The date. They came for her on a Tuesday morning, while she was feeding the birds. That was the detail Betsy could never afterward speak of without weeping, that her mistress was standing in the frozen garden with breadcrumbs in her bare hand, and the robins were coming to her, when the black carriage turned through the gates of Fernhallow with the Duke's crest on its door. Charlotte saw the crest. Then she saw the 2 strangers who climbed down after her husband, sober men in black, with soft voices and hard eyes, and a leather case of the kind that doctors carry. And she understood everything, instantly, completely, standing there in the snow with breadcrumbs in her hand. Not lawyers, not the axe in daylight. Oh, Edmund, even now I thought too well of you. Charlotte, my dear. The Duke's voice had never in 12 years been so tender. That was the most frightening thing of all. These gentlemen are Dr. Grimshaw and Dr. Pell. They have come a very long way out of concern for you. We are all, and his eyes were soft and sorrowful and triumphant all at once, so very concerned. They called it an examination. It took place in her own parlor, before her own fire, with her own tea going cold on the tray. And it was the most perfectly constructed trap that was ever laid for a truthful woman. Because here was its genius. Here was the thing Vivienne had understood, whispering into the Duke's ear at midnight. Every true thing Charlotte said would sound like madness. "Now then, Your Grace." Dr. Grimshaw had a kindly manner and a notebook that never closed. "Your husband tells us you have suffered from certain troubling beliefs. About your diamonds, for instance. Can you tell us about your diamonds?" Charlotte looked at the doctor. She looked at his notebook. She saw with cold clarity the road forking before her. Silence, which would be written down as *sullen, withdrawn, uncooperative, or the truth, which would be written down as delusion. She chose the truth, because it was all she had, and because part of her still could not believe that truth could simply be repealed. "The Ashworth diamonds were pawned 14 months ago," she said, calmly and precisely, "by my husband for £11,000 at an establishment near the Strand. He replaced them with a paste copy. A Lloyd's jeweler discovered the substitution 5 days ago. These are facts, gentlemen, and they can be verified in an afternoon." Dr. Grimshaw nodded, gently, sadly. His pen moved. Charlotte could read it upside down. Her grandfather had taught her that too, at the counting-house desk, a lifetime ago. Fixed delusion, husband as thief, elaborate and systematized. "And I understand," murmured Dr. Pell, "that you believe His Grace has been practicing your signature." "He has." Colonel James Ashworth saw the sheet on his desk. "Draws others into the delusion. Note, the colonel abroad cannot be consulted. And that your husband wishes you harm. That there is, forgive me, your grace, a policy upon your life." "There is. My solicitor has seen it." The pen moved. Persecution mania advanced. Believes even her lawyer complicit in discovery of plots. And that was when Charlotte stopped talking, because she had finally seen the whole shape of it. The trap was not built despite the truth. The trap was built out of * the truth. Every fact was a symptom. Every proof was a delusion. Every witness she named was either abroad, or elderly, or obviously imposed upon by her Grace's sad condition. She was a woman contradicting a duke, and in the year of our Lord in the great sane kingdom of England, that alone was half a diagnosis. She fell silent. The pen moved anyway. "Patient becomes guarded and suspicious when questioned. Classic presentation. Heads or tails, madam? Heads, you are mad. Tails, you are mad." The two doctors withdrew with the Duke to the dining room for 20 minutes and a bottle of his best claret. When they came out, the certificates were signed. 2 signatures. That was all English law required to make a sane woman vanish. 2 signatures, bought and paid for, drying by her own fire. "A private establishment in Yorkshire," Dr. Grimshaw told the Duke in the hallway in the hushed tone of undertakers. "Discreet, experienced with cases of rank. The superintendent can receive her Grace on Friday. Until then she must be kept quiet, confined, and above all no correspondence. Letters excite these patients dreadfully." In the parlor doorway the Duke turned back to his wife. The doctors were gone. The tenderness went with them. For a moment they looked at each other alone, 12 years of marriage, stripped to the bone. "You should have signed the paper, Charlotte," he said softly. "You should have read the marriage settlement, Edmund," she answered. "We are both of us paying for skipped reading." Something flickered in his eyes, that same vertigo she had seen on the night of the brandy, the cornered thing, the fear. What else does she know? But it was too late for him to stop, and they both knew that too. He was a gambler to the end, all his ruin on one last card. "Goodbye, madam. The carriage comes Friday." What followed were the 3 worst days of Charlotte Winslow's life. Her door was locked from the outside. Her writing desk was carried away bodily, ink and pens and all. Her maid, her Betsy, was barred from her room. A hired nurse with forearms like a blacksmith brought her meals and watched her eat with flat, incurious eyes. Through the window she saw the Duke's men going through the house, drawer by drawer, box by box, hunting for the pawnbroker's receipt, for the trust papers, for whatever weapon they imagined she kept at Fernhallow. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Everything that mattered slept in Mr. Pembroke's iron safe at Lincoln's Inn, 200 miles away. But that, Charlotte realized on the second sleepless night, staring at the ceiling, that was exactly the horror of it. The proof was in London. She would be in Yorkshire, behind a wall, certified, silenced, her word legally worth less than a child's. Pembroke could hold the papers for 50 years. Papers cannot demand to be read. And Friday was coming, and no one in the world who loved her knew what was happening in this house. For one black hour that night, the merchant's granddaughter came very close to breaking. She thought of 19 years in a quiet establishment. She thought of Vivienne's uncle's first wife. She wept, silently, into the pillow, so the nurse would not hear and write it down, and she was more afraid than she had ever been in her life. And then, somewhere in the dark, an old voice, brandy and tobacco and the creak of a counting-house chair. When they cheat you, girls, smile, smile and count. So she counted. She lay in the dark with her heart hammering, and she counted what she had left. 1, they wanted her quiet, so she would be quiet. Calm, docile, grateful, even. A calm patient is a carelessly guarded patient. 2, Friday was 3 days away, and a letter, if a letter could fly, could reach London in 1. 3, they had locked her door and taken her desk and barred her maid. But they had not counted the household. The Duke never counted servants. Servants were furniture. He had forgotten that furniture has eyes, and that every soul at Fernhallow had watched their quiet, kind mistress feed robins from her hand for a month, and had now watched 2 strangers sign her out of existence over a bottle of claret. 3, she had the household. In the morning, Charlotte drank her tea meekly. She thanked the nurse. She sat by the window with folded hands, the picture of a poor, sad, broken lady, and when the laundry girl came at noon to strip the bed linens, with the nurse standing right there in the doorway, Charlotte did nothing at all but sit quietly. She did not need to do anything. It was already done. Because at dawn, through the keyhole of the locked door, in the one dark hour when the nurse went down for her own breakfast, there had been a whisper, Betsy's whisper, fierce and terrified and loyal beyond all price. The laundry goes out to the village Thursday. The basket. Nobody searches dirty sheets, if you can get me but 1 paper by tomorrow. And Charlotte, who had no pen, no ink, no desk, Charlotte, whose grandfather had started with 1 market stall and taught her that a merchant writes wherever there is need, had knelt by the cold hearth in the dead of night, and taken up a stub of charcoal from the grate, and printed, on the blank flyleaf torn silently from her prayer book, in small, black, steady letters, the words that carried her whole life in them. Thursday at noon, the laundry cart rattled out of the gates of Fernhallow, past the Duke's hired watchman, who glanced into it and saw exactly what he expected to see: sheets. And deep inside them, folded small as a locket, traveling toward the village and the mail coach and the Great North Road and London, a single page of scorched paper, addressed in charcoal to Mr. Pembrok, Lincoln's Inn. 6 words beneath the name. Only 6, but 6 would be enough for the man who had bowed to her like royalty, and for a colonel in Edinburgh who had said send 1 word asterisk. They say I am mad, Friday. The mail train from the north came into London at 7:30 on Friday morning, and by 9 o'clock a battered envelope, addressed in charcoal, lay open on a desk at Lincoln's Inn. Mr. Pembroke was 68 years old. He had buried a wife, served the law for 44 years, and never once in his life raised his voice in his own chambers. His clerks would remember Friday forever, because on Friday morning, old Mr. Pembroke read 6 charcoal words, went white to the lips, and came out of his office moving like a man of 30, already shouting for his coat, his clerk, and a cab to the telegraph office, in that order. The telegram that flew north to Edinburgh 11 minutes later contained, likewise, only 6 words. He had promised her once that words would be enough, and Mr. Pembroke kept his promises. Colonel Ashwrth, FERNHOLLOW, Friday, GO now. James Ashworth received it at his hotel at 10:15, still in his shirt sleeves. The porter who carried it up said afterward that the colonel read it once, said one soldier's word the porter declined to repeat, and was dressed, armed with his stick, and gone to the railway station inside of 8 minutes, pausing only to send 2 telegrams of his own, one to Lincoln's Inn, and one, oddly, to a country magistrate near the Ashworth estate, an old brother officer from the Punjab, which read, "Meet the 2:40 train with your carriage and your oath of office. Wrong being done. Will explain. ASHWRTH." The express thundered south. James sat rigid by the window, watching the winter fields tear past, doing the arithmetic over and over. The train reached the county station at 2:40. Fernhallow was 11 miles from the station, and somewhere on those same white roads coming the other way was a carriage from a private establishment in Yorkshire. "Hold on, Charlotte, be slow, be difficult, hold on." But that was the terrible thing, he knew she would be neither. She would be calm. She would walk out with her head up, the way she had walked out of that ballroom. Dignity was her armor and her habit. And dignity, God help her, was fast. The asylum carriage came to Fernhallow at 3 o'clock, black, windowless above the waist, with a superintendent's man on the box and a matron inside with a face like a closed door. The hired nurse had Charlotte's one permitted trunk packed by 10 past. The certificates were presented. The papers were in order. Everything was in order. That was the horror of it, Betsy sobbed later. Everything was legal asterisk. They let her out at 3:20. The whole household stood in the hall, silent, in a double line. No order had been given. No order would have dared, and as Charlotte came down the stairs in her gray traveling dress, calm and upright and deathly pale, every man of them bowed and every woman of them curtsied, deep, deep, the way one honors a queen going to the scaffold. The superintendent's man shifted uneasily. The matron told the cook to open the door. Charlotte stopped on the threshold. One moment. The winter air on her face, and she allowed herself, for one heartbeat, to be afraid, because the carriage was black and the moors were white and London was 200 miles away, and 6 charcoal words seemed suddenly a very small ship to have set her whole life upon. "Smile, girl," said the old voice. "Smile and count." She lifted her chin and stepped out, and it was at that exact moment that everyone in the courtyard heard it. Hooves. 2 sets, hard-ridden on the frozen village road. Then the gate, and through it, at full gallop, scattering gravel, came 2 riders, a magistrate of 60 in a flapping greatcoat, and Colonel James Ashworth, hatless, mud to the waist, with eyes like the wrath of God. He did not dismount so much as arrive on the ground. He put himself bodily, immovably between Charlotte and the carriage door, and when the superintendent's man began, "Sir, these papers," James said, in a voice they heard in the village. "Sir Henry, read them the law." The old magistrate did not even get down from his horse. "I am Sir Henry Maddox, Justice of the Peace for this county. Certificates of lunacy are lawful, gentlemen, and so is an inquiry into how they were got. I have this day received sworn information that these certificates were signed after 20 minutes conversation and a bottle of claret, upon the instruction of a gentleman who stands to gain control of this lady's fortune. A fortune he has already attempted to reach by practicing her signature asterisk, to which this officer will swear on oath. That gentleman is called conspiracy, and it carries a smell that reaches all the way to the commissioners in lunacy, to whom a petition was carried this very morning by the lady's solicitor." He leaned forward in the saddle. "So, you may take her grace today, on paper that may be criminal by Easter, and go down with the gentleman who signed it. Or you may go home, and write to your superintendent that the matter is sub judice asterisk, and thank God for a cold ride. Choose." There was a long silence in the courtyard. The superintendent's man was paid £4 a month. He looked at the magistrate. He looked at the colonel, at the stick in the colonel's hand, and the scar over his eye and the 15 years of India in his face, and he made the wisest decision of his professional life. "Get up, Mrs. Hodge," he said to the matron. "We're going home." The black carriage turned in the courtyard and rattled away empty, and the household of Fernhallow, footman, cook, laundry girl, the lot, broke every rule of service in England and cheered. Charlotte stood very still on the steps. Now that it was over, her legs had gone strange beneath her, and James was there, one hand under her arm, steady as a wall, saying nothing at all, which was precisely, exactly right. "You came," she managed at last. "You sent one word," said the colonel. "I told you what would happen if you did." What happened next happened fast, because Mr. Pembroke on Friday morning had done far more than send a telegram. He had opened his iron safe and taken out a sealed letter of instruction that Charlotte had written weeks before, in her clear merchant's hand, against exactly this day. It began, "If he moves against my liberty or my person, wait for nothing further." By Monday, sworn statements lay before the commissioners in lunacy. Mr. Isaacs the pawnbroker, ledger under his arm, testifying, with the relief of an honest tradesman finally allowed to be honest, that the Ashworth diamonds had been pledged by his Grace himself, signed in his own hand, 14 months past. Mr. Wick of Lloyd's, testifying to the paste. Old Mr. Finn of Garrard's, testifying he had warned her Grace privately in June, proof that her delusion had been, from the first day, a plain and verifiable fact. Faced with which, Dr. Grimshaw and Dr. Pell did what such men always do. They ran. Each wrote to the commissioners blaming the other, and both letters, side by side, damned the pair of them. And on that same Monday morning, because Charlotte's sealed instruction had contained one further order, a clerk from a dull little firm in the city delivered by hand to Ashworth House, to the Duke's own breakfast table, a single sheet of excellent paper. Patience & Co. presents its compliments to His Grace the Duke of Ashworth, and gives notice that all notes, bonds, mortgages and obligations of His Grace now held by this company, schedule attached, in the sum of £71,400, are called for payment in full within 30 days, failing which the company will enforce its every remedy at law without further notice. The schedule ran to 4 pages. The Duke read the first page standing. He read the second sitting down. Somewhere on the third, between the mortgage on the London house and the loan he had believed safely buried with Lord Carew, he stopped reading, because his hands would no longer hold the paper steady. Everything, every debt, every note, every desperate midnight signature of 10 spendthrift years, gathered all of it silently into one single hand. One creditor, one stranger who had been buying his life out from under him, pound by pound for months, while he preened and spent and paraded, and who had waited to strike until the very week his own lawyers were burning, his doctors were fleeing, and every newspaper in London was sniffing at the wind. WHO, the Duke's voice cracked through the house like a pistol shot. His own solicitor, summoned at a run, stood sweating on the carpet. £71,000, a firm nobody has heard of. Somebody owns it, man. Companies have owners. I want the name. Your Grace, the ownership is held through a private trust. It took my clerks all morning. The arrangement was frankly brilliant. The name. The solicitor swallowed and held out an envelope. The Duke tore it open. Inside was a single line, copied out by a law clerk in a fair round hand. The beneficial owner of Patience and Company, as recorded in a deed of trust at Lincoln's Inn, dated the previous September. The Duke of Ashworth read the line. The paper made a small sound in the silence, a slow crumpling, and His Grace sat down, without meaning to, in the nearest chair, and the color went out of him window by window, and he said nothing at all, because there was nothing whatever left to say. The line read, Sole beneficial owner, Charlotte, Her Grace the Duchess of Ashworth, in memory of Josiah Winslow, master of the merchant ship Patience. He owed his house to his wife. He owed his horses to his wife, his wine, his tailor, his carriage, the coat on his back, and the chair he had collapsed into. For 6 months, every candle he had burned, every jewel he had hung on Vivienne, every pound of the ruin he had built. He had borrowed it all, every penny, from the woman he had tried to lock away. And far to the north, in the pale winter sunshine at Fernhallow, with a colonel standing guard at the gate and the whole household walking on air, the sole beneficial owner of Patience and Company stood in her garden with breadcrumbs in her bare hand, feeding the robins. Smiling. Scandal in London moves at 3 speeds. A small scandal moves at the speed of a dinner party. A great scandal moves at the speed of the Morning Post. But a scandal with diamonds in it, and a mistress, and a duchess, and a madhouse, a scandal like that moves at the speed of fire in a dry field, and there is no wall in England that can stand in its way. By the first week of March, everyone knew. The commissioners in lunacy published their finding, and it was written in the dry, cold language of the law, which is the most merciless language on earth. The certificates concerning Her Grace the Duchess of Ashworth had been improperly obtained. The beliefs recorded as delusions were, upon investigation, matters of verifiable fact. The conduct of doctors. Grimshaw and Pell was referred to the College of Physicians. Dr. Pell fled to Boulogne by the Sunday boat. Dr. Grimshaw stayed and wished he hadn't. And with that one paragraph, the dam broke, and the truth came out, all of it in order, each fact worse than the last, and the newspapers laid it before the public like a 7-course dinner. The Duke had pawned the famous Ashworth diamonds behind his wife's back. The Duke had hung a necklace of asterisk glass on his mistress before 200 guests, while insulting his blameless wife to her face. The Duchess had known, had discovered it, traced it, redeemed the true stones with her own fortune, and had borne it all in silence. And when she had refused to sign away her grandfather's trust, the Duke had tried to bury her, sane as sunrise, in a Yorkshire madhouse. London went mad in her place. The same drawing rooms that had called her the little merchant duchess now spoke of nothing but her courage. Lady Morton, the very Lady Morton of "How brave of you to come, dear," was heard at 3 separate dinners describing how she had always felt, always said that Her Grace had the finest character in England. Men at the clubs who had wagered on the Duke's remarriage now blackballed him from the very rooms where they'd laughed at his jokes. It was hypocrisy, of course, glittering, shameless, wholesale hypocrisy. Charlotte read the reports at Fernhallow and remarked to Betsy, quite calmly, that society was a weather vane, and a weather vane is at least useful for telling which way the wind blows. But even Charlotte did not foresee what happened next. Because the Duke, in his ruin, made one final mistake, the mistake he had been making all his life. He looked for someone weaker to blame, and he chose Vivienne. He told anyone who would still listen, there were not many, that the asylum had been her idea, her scheme, whispered at midnight, that he was a weak man led astray by a scheming woman, that the necklace itself had been worn at her vain insistence. Some of it was even true, all of it was fatal. Because Edmund had never in his life understood the creatures he collected, and he did not understand this one. Vivienne Carroll could forgive being lied to, being ruined, even being abandoned. She could not forgive being laughed at, and thanks to him, every drawing room in London was laughing. She left Ashworth House on a Tuesday without farewell. She left the paste necklace on his desk, arranged neatly on its black velvet, with a card in her small vicious hand, "For your next Duchess." And she drove directly. Every gossip in London tracked the carriage to Rixford House, the London home of the Earl of Rixford. To understand what that meant, you must know one old story. 20 years before, at a card table in Brighton, young Edmund Ashworth had ruined a friend, taken his money, his notes, and the following season, his intended bride, and laughed about all three. The friend was Rixford. The Earl was grey now, and rich, and patient, and he had spent 20 years collecting every scrap of information about Edmund Ashworth, the way other men collect paintings, waiting for a day he had begun to fear would never come. And now up his front steps came the Duke's own mistress, carrying 2 years of the Duke's secrets, his letters, his midnight confessions, his debts, his lies, and asking only for protection and revenge. They say the Earl of Rixford laughed for a quarter of an hour. Mr. Pembroke came north in the last week of March and found the Duchess in the garden. He carried a leather case fat with papers and the careful expression of a lawyer approaching the largest question of his career. "It can be done, Your Grace," he said without preamble. 2 years ago I should have said impossible, but the new act has opened the door. A wife may now petition the court itself for the dissolution of her marriage. She must prove adultery. We have it in mountains. Lady Vivienne's own testimony is promised. The Earl of Rixford has seen to that. And she must prove more than adultery, cruelty joined to it. He paused. "Your Grace, in the opinion of every lawyer in London, a husband who conspires to imprison his sane wife in an asylum to seize her fortune has met the standard of cruelty as no case yet brought under the Act. It would be heard in open court. The newspapers will print every word. There is no private road to this. Do you understand what it will cost you, what they will ask you publicly on oath?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment, looking out at the moors, which were beginning at the edges to turn green. "He did everything in daylight, Mr. Pembroke," she said at last. "He gave away my diamonds before 200 people. He announced my exile at his own breakfast table. He shamed me publicly for 12 years because he believed correctly that the world would let him." She turned. "Then let the world watch this too, in daylight, in open court. I will not creep out of this marriage through some quiet arrangement as if I were the one with something to hide. Bring the petition." Pembroke bowed his head. Then, from the bottom of the leather case, he brought out one more thing, a flat box he had carried from a certain vault at Coutts, 200 miles, on his own knees the whole way. "In that case, Your Grace," said the old man, and there was something bright in his eye, "the question arises of what you shall wear." The court sat in Westminster Hall on a grey morning in April, and London had seen nothing like it since the coronation. The queue for the public gallery began forming before dawn. Peeresses sent footmen at 5 in the morning to hold their places. The newspapers had brought their fastest men. Inside, the courtroom was packed to the paneling, silk and broadcloth crushed together, fans already moving, every eye on the 2 empty chairs at the front where the parties would sit. The Duke arrived first, and the crowd's murmur had knives in it. He had aged 10 years in 10 weeks. His coat was perfect. Edmund's coats would be perfect in his coffin, but his face was the color of ash and his eyes went nowhere at all. Behind him came his lawyers, and behind them nothing, no friends, no family. The colonel, his own cousin, sat on the other side of the aisle. Then the doors opened at the back of the hall, and the whole room turned as one animal and went silent. The Duchess of Ashworth came up the center aisle unhurried, in a gown of deep grey silk, her head high, her step even exactly, said those who had been there, exactly as she had once crossed a ballroom to curtsy to her own humiliation. On the arm of old Mr. Pembroke she came, past the craning peeresses, past the scribbling reporters, into the light of the great south window. And there the light caught her, and the gasp that went up could be heard. Witnesses swore in the street outside. Because around her neck, on grey silk, blazing in the April sun like a river of white fire, 200 years of history, 5 duchesses deep, redeemed from a back room by the Strand with a merchant's granddaughter's own gold, were the Ashworth diamonds, the real ones, She had kept them in darkness for a year. She had smiled while glass was hung on another woman's neck. She had waited through exile, through the locked room, through the black carriage in the courtyard, for one single morning, this one. Let the court ask whether the diamonds existed. Let the lawyers dispute what was paste and what was true. Here was her answer, worn in open daylight before all of England, catching the sun. Charlotte took her seat, arranged her skirts and looked, for the first time, directly across the aisle at her husband. The Duke of Ashworth stared at the necklace, at 11,000 pounds of his own signature, at 14 months of his own lies, at the exact shape and blaze of his own destruction, hanging quietly at his wife's throat. Then he looked away. He looked away, and the Duchess of Ashworth before the eyes of all London, gently, deliberately, unmistakably. He smiled. "Silence in court," said the usher. "God save the Queen, the petition of Ashworth against Ashworth." The trial of Ashworth against Ashworth lasted 4 days, and England talked of nothing else for 4 months. It was not, in truth, much of a contest. It was less a battle than a demolition, brick by brick, witness by witness, in front of a gallery packed with the Duke's former friends. Mr. Isaacs came with his ledger and held it open, and the court saw the signature. Mr. Wick of Lloyd's explained pace to the judge with professional sorrow. Old Mr. Fenn of Garrard's, 80 years old and straight as a ramrod, told how he had known the false stones in a minute and the true stones for 30 years. Colonel James Ashworth took the oath and described, in a voice like a court-martial, a sheet of paper on his cousin's desk with his cousin's wife's signature practiced down it, line after line, like a schoolboy's punishment. The 2 doctors' letters, each blaming the other, were read aloud in sequence, and the gallery's laughter had to be gavelled down. But the day London queued in the rain for was the 3rd day, the day Lady Vivienne Carroll took the stand. She wore black like a widow, which everyone agreed was magnificent theatre. She testified for 2 hours in a voice of perfect calm, and she spared him nothing. The affair, dated and detailed. The gifts bought on credit while his wife economized. The night of the winter ball, he told me, my lord, that his wife's feelings were of no more account than the feelings of the furniture. And last and worst, the midnight conversation in the study, which she recounted with only one small amendment. In her version, the asylum had been entirely his idea, and she had wept and begged him to relent. It was a lie, of course, the one lie in a day of truth. Charlotte, sitting 20 feet away, knew it was a lie better than anyone alive. She said nothing. Her grandfather had taught her that too. When your enemy is burning down your other enemy's house, girl, do not interrupt. The Duke's counsel rose to cross-examine her, thought better of it, and sat down. On the 4th day, the judge spoke for 40 minutes, and gave the Duke of Ashworth a place in legal history that would outlast every honor his ancestors ever earned. A course of conduct, said his lordship, as cold, as mercenary, and as cruel as any this court has had occasion to examine. A deliberate conspiracy against the liberty of a blameless wife. Conduct which, had it succeeded, must be called by its true name, the theft of a human life. The marriage of Charlotte and Edmund was dissolved at 11 minutes past 2 on a Thursday afternoon. The gallery, peeresses, reporters, fishwives who had queued since dawn stood up and cheered as if at a race meeting, and for once, the ushers did not try very hard to stop them. The financial end came in the summer, and it came quietly in Mr. Pembroke's office, because Patience and Company did not need a courtroom. It only needed a calendar. The 30 days had run out long ago. The Duke arrived on foot. That detail was in every drawing room by nightfall. The 9th Duke of Ashworth, on foot, because the carriages had been sold. He sat across the long table from his former wife, separated by 4 lawyers and 71,000 pounds, and he could not look at her, and this time it was not contempt. It was that he physically could not. The lawyers droned. The London house surrendered, its contents sold at auction. London had fought for tickets. Lady Morton bought the dining chairs. The unentailed farms surrendered. The horses, the cellar, the plate gone. The great Ashworth estate itself was entailed and could not be touched, but it was mortgaged past its income, and the mortgage sat in the files of Patience & Co., which meant the Duke would keep his title, his empty ancestral house, and not 1 shilling that his creditor did not choose to allow him. When the papers were all signed, Charlotte spoke to him directly, for the first and last time since the courtroom. "There is a lodge on the Fernhallow Road, Edmund. 6 rooms, sound roof. It is yours for your lifetime, that paper there. With it goes 400 a year, paid quarterly. It will keep a small household, a decent table, and 1 horse. It will not keep a gaming table, and it stops. The deed is quite clear, the day you sign your first new note of hand." The Duke stared at her. Ruin he had prepared for. The lawyers had told him what to expect. Mercy he had not prepared for, and it went into him like a knife. "Why," he said, his voice cracked on the 1 syllable. "You've won, why?" Charlotte drew on her gloves, 1 finger at a time, exactly as she had done in this same office on a rainy September evening a lifetime ago. "Because my grandfather kept a rule and I keep it still," she said. "Collect the debt. Never hate the debtor, hate costs interest." She rose. "You'll find I bear you no hatred at all, Edmund. That is the worst news anyone will give you this year. Hatred would mean you still mattered." She was at the door before he found his voice. "Charlotte," she stopped, not turning. The broken man at the table asked the only question he had left. "That night, the ball, when the necklace, you knew, you stood there and you curtsied asterisk, you knew asterisk. How did you stand it?" Charlotte turned in the doorway and looked at him for a long, quiet moment. At the wreck of the golden man who had come to her grandfather's house 1 spring afternoon, 33 years old and glorious. "I counted," she said, and walked out into the sunlight. Society finished what the lawyers had begun, and society was crueler. The clubs went first, 1 by 1, letters of committee, regrets. Then the invitations stopped, not dramatically, just utterly, the way snow stops. Men who owed their careers to Ashworth patronage crossed the street. In September, at Doncaster races, the Duke entered the grandstand and 300 people contrived, without 1 word being exchanged, to be facing the other way. The final door closed in November at court when it was made known, quietly, through a chamberlain in the way that has no appeal, that His Grace's attendance at the Queen's levee would not be required. Not that year. Not any year. He had kept his title. It had become a bell around his neck. As for Lady Vivienne, the Earl of Rixford, having used her testimony to the last drop, discovered that his interest in her had been, after all, chiefly historical, and Paris was said to suit her wonderfully at this season. She sailed in October. London, which forgives beauty almost anything, might in time have forgiven her the affair. It could not forgive what the trial had printed forever, that she had stood in a ballroom queening it over a duchess, in glass asterisk. And so the year turned, and the first snow fell on London in the first week of December, and the anniversary came round. 1 year, almost to the night, since 1,000 candles had burned in the great ballroom of Ashworth House, and a duke had fastened a necklace on the wrong woman, and a duchess had curtsied and smiled. By winter, as all of London now said, over teacups and port, in the exact words of the season, one of them was ruined, ruined for good and all. And it was not the Duchess. James proposed on the evening of the first snow, at Fernhallow, in the plainest way imaginable, which was, everyone who knew him agreed, the only way he could have survived attempting it. They had walked out to see the snow come down over the moors, and stood at the garden wall where she fed the robins, and he turned his hat around twice in his hands and said, "Charlotte, I'm 41 years old. I have a scar over my eye, a colonel's pension, 12,000 pounds honestly got, and no gift whatever for speeches. You are the finest and bravest human being I have met on 4 continents, and I have loved you quietly, and I hope decently, since the night I watched you curtsy to your own executioner and smile. I know better than any man alive what marriage cost you the first time. I am not asking you to gamble again. I am asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving it isn't one." He stopped. The snow came down. That's the whole of the speech. I practiced a longer one. It was worse. Charlotte stood with snowflakes settling on her gray wool shawl, and found that she, who had faced down doctors, dukes, and the court of Westminster without a tremor, could not for a moment entirely trust her voice. "You should know what you are asking for, James," she managed at last. "I come with encumbrances, a solicitor who bows like a courtier, a maid who commits crimes with laundry baskets, several robins with expectations, and a necklace," her eyes were bright and not only with cold, "that I find I have grown rather attached to." "I'll take the lot," said the colonel. "Then you had better come in out of the snow," said Charlotte, and gave him her hand. "Winters, you will find, are long in this family, but they end well." 2 winters later. Snow again. Snow over the moors, snow on the garden wall, snow whirling soft and thick past the windows of Fernhallow, and inside, firelight and the smell of cinnamon, and more noise than the old house had heard in 100 years. They had kept Fernhallow. Everyone had expected the colonel and his bride to take a fine house in London, and they could have bought half a street of them. But Charlotte had only looked around the little parlor where she had once been locked away, and said that a house, like a person, deserved the chance to be known for its best winter instead of its worst. So they stayed. They built on a wing. They filled the stables, and the kitchen, and the guest rooms. Old Hodges the butler had come north within a month of the wedding, without waiting to be asked, and ruled the household with a benevolence that would have shocked London. And on this particular snowy evening, 2 winters after a certain ball, the house was full for Christmas. Mr. Pembroke was there, dozing magnificently by the fire with the Times over his face. He came north 4 times a year now, on legal business, which everyone understood to mean gingerbread. Betsy was there, though she was Betsy no longer. She was Mrs. Ellis, married that spring to the village schoolmaster, and she still, out of pure habit, straightened her former mistress's shawl every time she passed her chair. Sir Henry Maddox, magistrate, was in the corner teaching a footman to cheat at whist, on the sound legal principle that a man cannot guard against what he does not understand. And in the best chair by the fire sat Charlotte, with her daughter on her lap. Josephine Ashworth, named for a merchant who had started with one market stall, was 8 months old, had her father's laugh and her mother's watchful gray eyes, and was at this moment conducting a thorough professional examination of the extraordinary glittering thing around her mother's neck. Small fists closed on it. Firelight leapt in the stones. Charlotte wore the Ashworth diamonds by the fire, on an ordinary evening, with cake crumbs on the carpet and a baby pulling at the clasp, not locked in a vault, not saved for state occasions, worn the way one wears a thing that has stopped being a chain and become, at last, simply hers asterisk. 200 years of duchesses had carried that necklace like a duty. Josephine's mother wore it like a story with a good ending, and let the baby chew on it, which would have caused 5 generations of Ashworth ancestors to faint dead away. "She'll have it one day, you know," said James, leaning over the back of the chair. "Poor child, the weight of history." "She will have the necklace," said Charlotte comfortably, "and the story that goes with it. The necklace is worth 40,000 pounds. The story is worth a great deal more. It is worth knowing from the cradle exactly what a smile can cost the people who make a woman need one." Far away in Calais, it was snowing too. The gentlemen of the English colony there, that grey little brotherhood of ruined men who live in French ports because their debts cannot swim the channel, knew the tall Englishman with the perfect, threadbare coat quite well by now. He had a title, they said, a real one, and a lodge in England he dared not return to, and a story he would tell at length for the price of a bottle. He had had 400 a year once on one simple condition, that he never gamble again. He had kept the condition for 11 months. There had been a card room in Baden and a sure thing and a note of hand, one small note, one only, and the quarterly payments had stopped, as the deed said, precisely and forever, and the creditors had come, and here he was. The younger exile sometimes bought his bottle just to hear the tale, because he told it grandly, and because they did not quite believe it. The diamonds, the paste, the madhouse, the wife who had bought his debts with her grandfather's money and smiled at him across a ballroom for 6 months, knowing everything. Gentlemen, asterisk he always finished, staring at something none of them could see. I fastened glass around one woman's neck, but it was my own neck it closed on. Mind who you teach patience to. They laughed, he never did. And in Paris, where it was also snowing on 2 gas-lit boulevards, a beautiful woman in her middle 30s swept into a salon in the Faubourg wearing a truly remarkable necklace, and the whispers began before her wrap was off. Paris knew the story too. Paris had read the trial with breakfast, delighted for weeks. The stones might well have been real this time. No one troubled to check. It didn't matter. Every eye in the room went to her throat, and every fan came up, and behind the fans the same words in French and English, always the same, at every door she ever entered for the rest of her life. That's the one, the glass one. Imagine she queened it over a duchess in glass. Some prisons, it turns out, are not built of stone. But that is their story, and they were welcome to it. Back at Fernhallow, the snow fell soft on the garden where the robins slept, and the fire settled, and Josephine finally surrendered to sleep with one small hand still curled around 100,000 candle flames worth of white fire, and James put his arm around them both, and old Pembroke snored gently under the Times asterisk, at peace. London still told the tale, of course. It had already begun to improve it, the way London does. Soon the necklace would be twice its size, the ball twice as grand, the curtsy twice as deep. But the ending never changed, because the ending was the point. Grandmothers told it to granddaughters, and they told it like this. Society, as the Duchess had learned, forgets many things. It forgets its debts, its friends, and its promises. It forgot a duke entirely while he still lived. But it never, never forgets a woman who smiled. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.